The sun over the Plaza do Comercio felt like a warm blanket, a stark contrast to the ice-cold wine in my hand. Then my phone shattered the peace. It was Amber. She wasn't just crying, she was shrieking. "They're calling the police," she screamed. "Strangers, they're in my condo." I didn't need to ask to know exactly what she'd done. She had used the emergency key, the one strictly for fires or floods, to move herself and her boyfriend into a property I sold 2 weeks ago. I didn't gasp. I didn't apologize. I just took a slow sip of my vinho verde. Before I tell you how my family tried to hijack my life from across the ocean, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to know who's part of our community. To understand why I didn't scream, why my pulse remained steady, you have to understand where I came from. You have to understand the architecture of guilt I lived inside for 32 years. In Seattle, the rain didn't just wash the streets. It felt like it soaked into the drywall of my life, making everything heavy, damp, and impossible to move. My parents, Jeffrey and Holly, didn't build a home based on love. They built a structure based on utility. In their blueprint, I wasn't a daughter. I was a load-bearing wall. My purpose was to stand there silent and sturdy, holding up the roof so my sister Amber could dance in the living room without getting wet. They called it family duty. I called it a long con. The data point wasn't hidden. It was parked in the driveway. On Amber's 16th birthday, she received a brand new crossover SUV. It cost $36,000. I remember the price because I saw the paperwork on the kitchen counter while I was making my own lunch. When I turned 16, Jeffrey handed me a bus schedule and a lecture about the carbon footprint of unnecessary driving. He called it character building. It didn't stop at cars. The disparity was a line item in a budget they thought I was too stupid to calculate. For Amber, they engaged private tutors, SAT prep courses that cost thousands, and eventually a tuition bill for a private liberal arts college that totaled $215,000 over 4 years. They paid every cent. They said they were investing in her potential. For me, they said they were investing in my resilience. I worked 3 jobs while getting my degree. I scanned groceries until 2 in the morning, slept for 4 hours, and then went to class. When I graduated with honors and zero help from them, they didn't celebrate my grit. They celebrated the fact that I was low maintenance. That was their favorite compliment for me. "Lauren is so low maintenance. Lauren doesn't need us." They were right. I didn't need them. But they desperately needed me. Over the years, I became a UX researcher, a job entirely focused on analyzing user behavior and optimizing systems. Naturally, I applied that lens to my family. I realized I wasn't a person to Jeffrey and Holly. I was a diversified portfolio. I was the safety net they wove to catch Amber whenever she inevitably fell. That brings us to the condo, my condo. I bought it 2 years ago in a sleek building downtown. It had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Sound that cost me every bonus and stock option I had earned in a decade of grinding. I bought it as a sanctuary. But the moment my parents walked in for the housewarming, I saw the look in their eyes. They weren't looking at my home. They were looking at a family asset. Holly touched the quartz countertops and said, "This is so much space for just one person, Lauren. It's almost wasteful, isn't it?" Jeffrey walked onto the balcony, looked at the view, and nodded. "This is a good investment. It's good to know we have this in the family." They didn't see my name on the deed. They saw a guest room for Amber when she got bored of her roommates. They saw a liquidation option if Jeffrey's business had a bad quarter. They saw a resource they could harvest whenever the golden child was hungry. So when the job offer from Lisbon came, I knew exactly what would happen. I knew that if I left that condo empty even for a month, they would colonize it. They would guilt me into letting Amber House sit, and within a week she would be redecorating. I realized then that the guilt I felt, the heavy, crushing obligation to share what I earned, wasn't natural. It was a cage they had built around me, brick by expensive brick. And I knew there was only one way to escape a cage that strong. You don't unlock the door. You bulldoze the whole building. The offer from Lisbon wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline. But the moment I saw the email, my first thought wasn't celebration. It was panic. Who will pay Amber's rent if I leave? Who will handle the parents' inevitable tech support calls? Who will fix everything? That panic was the wake-up call. I sat in my ergonomic chair, staring at the gray Seattle skyline, and ran the simulation. My competence hadn't saved my family. It had crippled them. By fixing every crisis, by paying every bill, by being the reliable one, I had created a vacuum of competence. I had made it so easy for them to be helpless that they had forgotten how to survive. Amber wasn't just entitled. She was atrophied. My parents weren't just users. They were enablers who had outsourced their parenting to their eldest daughter. If I told them I was moving, the guilt trip would be immediate. They would beg me to keep the condo. Just in case, they would say, just until Amber gets back on her feet. And I knew myself. I knew that if they pushed hard enough, the architecture of guilt would activate and I would cave. I would turn my sanctuary into a crash pad and I would be paying the HOA fees from Portugal while Amber threw parties I wasn't invited to. So I made a choice. I chose silence. A discreet real estate agent handled the listing off-market. My life went into boxes late at night disguised as routine decluttering. When they asked about my plans for the condo while I was abroad, the lie came easily over Sunday dinner. I hired a property management company, I told them. They're going to rent it out to corporate clients. It's all handled. Strict lease. No family allowed. My mother frowned, fork pausing halfway to her mouth. A management company? That sounds so impersonal, Lauren. Strangers in your home. It pays the mortgage, I said, keeping my voice flat. 2 weeks before my flight, I sat across from the Coopers at a long mahogany table. They were a young couple, both architects, their eyes wide with excitement. They talked about painting the nursery and hosting dinner parties. They saw a future in that space. I signed the papers, handed over the keys, and felt a physical weight lift off my chest. It wasn't just a sale, it was an amputation. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Amber. I boarded the plane to Lisbon with 2 suitcases and a one-way ticket, leaving behind a ghost house that no longer belonged to me. I thought I had outsmarted them. I thought I had finally escaped the vacuum. I didn't realize how desperate they were to be filled. I sat in the Plaza do Comércio, staring at my phone. Amber's hysterical screams had faded, replaced by the grim reality of what had just happened. My parents had driven her to the condo. They had unlocked the door. They had helped her carry boxes into a stranger's home. They had overridden my property management story, not because they knew it was a lie, but because they simply didn't care if it was true. In their minds, my property was family property. My boundaries were suggestions. I dialed the number for Ryan Cooper. My hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from a cold, simmering rage. He answered on the first ring. "Mr. Cooper," I said, my voice steady. "This is Lauren. I am so incredibly sorry." "Miss Wallace," his voice was tight, vibrating with adrenaline. "Your sister is currently screaming at my wife that this is her house. The police are 5 minutes away." "Let them come," I said. "Put me on speaker." I heard the rustle of the phone being moved, then Amber's voice shrill and panicked. "You can't kick me out. My parents said I could stay here. Lauren said it was okay." "I never said that, Amber," I said, my voice projecting into a living room 4,000 miles away. The silence that followed was absolute. Lauren Amber sounded small. "Lauren, tell them. Tell them Mom and Dad said." "Mom and Dad don't own that condo, Amber." "I did, and I sold it. You are trespassing." I heard a gasp then, the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. "Mr. Cooper," I continued, "the police officer will need a statement. Please tell them I have confirmed the sale and that no one in my family has permission to be on the premises. If she refuses to leave, you have my full support to press charges." Lauren Amber shrieked. "You can't! Mom and Dad are going to kill you." "They can try," I said. "Put the officer on when they arrive." I spent the next 20 minutes facilitating the eviction of my own sister from a continent away. I listened as the officer arrived, as he reviewed the deed I had emailed to Mr. Cooper, as he told Amber she had 2 choices, leave voluntarily or leave in handcuffs. I heard the defeat in her voice as she chose the former. When the line finally went dead, I didn't cry. My emotions were locked in a vault. I ordered another glass of wine. The sun was setting over the Tagus River, turning the water a brilliant, shimmering gold. I felt a strange sensation in my chest, light and airy. It was the feeling of a bridge finally irrevocably burning. But the fire wasn't out yet. My phone lit up again. Incoming video call, Dad. It was time for the exit interview. I leaned back in the cafe chair, the remnants of my wine warming in the late afternoon sun. I accepted the video call. Jeffrey and Holly appeared on my screen, sitting shoulder to shoulder on their beige sectional. Amber was squeezed between them, her face blotchy, clutching a tissue like a prop. They looked like a tableau of righteous indignation. Lauren Jeffrey barked, his face filling the frame. "We demand an explanation. Right now." "I think you're confused," I said, my voice calm, professional. "I'm not the one who broke into a stranger's house." "Don't play games with us," Holly shrilled. "You set a trap. You let us believe that condo was available. You humiliated your sister. Do you know she had to leave in a police cruiser? Do you have any idea how traumatic that was for her?" "Traumatic," I repeated. "Traumatic is finding strangers in your living room. Traumatic is being arrested for trespassing. Amber is lucky the Coopers decided not to press charges. That was my doing, by the way. I talked them down. You should have told us, Amber wailed. You knew I needed a place. You did this on purpose to hurt me. I sold my property because I am moving to another continent, I said. It wasn't about you, Amber. Not everything is about you. We are family, Jeffrey shouted. Family helps family. That condo was a resource. You had a duty to share it until you were settled. How could you be so cold, so calculating? I looked at them, really looked at them. They weren't sad. They were furious that their resource had been taken away. They were angry that the ATM had stopped dispensing cash. Let me be clear, I said, shifting into the project manager persona that had saved my career so many times. I didn't owe you that house. I didn't owe you a warning. And I certainly don't owe you an apology. What I am going to do is send you an invoice. What Holly gasped. An invoice, I said. For the emergency locksmith the Coopers had to hire because Amber jammed the lock. For the professional cleaning crew they needed after you tracked mud through their foyer. And for the 3 nights at the hotel I just booked for Amber, which is the last financial assistance you will ever receive from me. You wouldn't dare, Jeffrey growled. Check your email, I said. I just hit send. You can pay it or you can explain to the Coopers why you won't. Goodbye. I ended the call before they could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline. I had just fired my parents. I ordered another glass of wine. The sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. I thought the worst was over. I thought I had won. Then my email pinged again. It wasn't my parents. It was a notification from my former boss in Seattle marked urgent. I opened it and the blood drained from my face. Lauren, it read, we need to talk. The new owners of your condo, the Coopers, Ryan Cooper, is the CFO of Pinnacle Group, our biggest client, and your father's biggest client. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. This was a professional disaster. The Coopers weren't just random strangers. They were the people who signed my father's paychecks, and they had just been invaded by his daughter. The war had just gone nuclear. The email from my former boss wasn't just a warning, it was a detonation. Ryan Cooper wasn't just a client. He was the CFO of Pinnacle Group, a conglomerate that accounted for 40% of my father's boutique consulting firm's revenue. Jeffrey had spent 15 years cultivating that relationship. He golfed with Ryan. He sent Ryan expensive scotch every Christmas. And his daughter had just broken into Ryan's new home. The police report had already been filed. The crazy sister story wasn't just neighborhood gossip. It had hit the professional grapevine. In Seattle's tight-knit business community, reputation was currency, and my family had just declared bankruptcy. My phone rang. It was Jeffrey. I stared at the screen. The power dynamic had shifted so violently, I almost felt vertigo. For 32 years, I had been the supplicant, the one begging for crumbs of approval. Now I held the only thing that could save him. I answered. Lauren, his voice was unrecognizable. The bluster was gone, replaced by a raw, trembling panic. Lauren, you have to help me, Ryan Cooper called. He's pulling the account. He says he can't trust a man whose family doesn't respect boundaries or property law. I'm sorry to hear that, Dad, I said, my voice cool. You have to fix this, he pleaded. You have to write him a letter. Tell him it was a miscommunication. Tell him you gave Amanda permission but forgot to tell him. Tell him anything. Just take the blame, Lauren, please. If I lose this account, the firm goes under. We lose everything. I sat in silence listening to his desperate breathing. He was asking me to lie. He was asking me to destroy my own professional credibility, to paint myself as scatterbrained and disorganized to save him from the consequences of his entitlement. He was asking me to set myself on fire to keep him warm. And for a second, the old architecture trembled. The habit of saving them was so deep, so ingrained. It's just a letter, a voice whispered. It would save them. Then I looked out at the Lisbon skyline. I thought about the vacuum of competence. If I fixed this, they would never learn. They would never grow. They would just wait for the next crisis and expect me to solve it. Dad, I said softly, do you remember when I was 12, when I asked you for money for the science fair and you told me that failure is the best teacher? Lauren, please, this isn't the time for... It is exactly the time, I said. I won't lie for you. I won't take the blame for Amber's crime or your enabling. This is what happens when you treat people like resources instead of humans. You lose them. You're being selfish, he cried, the old anger flaring up. Yes, I said, and the word tasted like honey. I am being selfish. I am preserving myself. And I am finally happy. I hung up. Then I blocked his number. I blocked Holly. I blocked Amber. I sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the city in twilight. I had just destroyed my father's business. I had just severed ties with my entire family. And I had never felt more alive. 6 months have passed since I hung up that phone. 6 months of silence. I blocked their numbers, their emails, their social media accounts. I didn't do it to punish them. I did it to protect the peace I had finally cultivated. But the world is small, and news travels even across the Atlantic. I learned through a former colleague on LinkedIn that Jeffrey's boutique firm took a massive hit. Ryan Cooper didn't just pull the Pinnacle account. He told his network why. In business, trust is the only currency that matters, and my father had proven he couldn't control his own assets, let alone anyone else's. The revenue loss forced a restructuring. They had to downsize. And that downsizing had the exact effect I predicted. With the family war chest depleted, the Amber subsidy finally dried up. They couldn't afford to pay her rent anymore. They couldn't afford to keep her as a pet. Last week I saw a status update from a mutual cousin. Amber has a job, a real one. She is working as a receptionist at a dental office in Bellevue. It isn't glamorous. It isn't the 6-figure salary she felt entitled to. But it is hers. The vacuum of competence worked. By removing myself, by refusing to be the crutch, I forced them to learn how to walk. It wasn't cruel. It was the most necessary thing I ever did. They are struggling, yes. They are likely miserable and blaming me for their misfortune. But they are functioning. They are surviving without cannibalizing me. I sit now at a small iron table in the Alfama district. The air smells of salt and grilled sardines. The waiter places a pastel de nata and a bica, a strong espresso, in front of me. I take a bite of the pastry, the custard warm and sweet, the flakes of crust sticking to my lips. I am alone. I have no emergency contacts listed in my phone. I have no family holidays on my calendar. I have no one calling me to fix their printer or pay their rent. For 32 years, I thought this kind of solitude would feel like a punishment. I thought it would feel like failure. Instead, I watch the tram rattle down the steep cobblestone street yellow against the blue sky, and I realize what it actually feels like. It feels like victory. It feels like the first breath you take after stepping out of a room that was slowly running out of oxygen. I didn't just survive my family. I outgrew them. I built a life that fits me, not a storage unit for their expectations. I take a sip of the coffee. It is bitter and perfect. I am selfish. I am solitary. I am free. If you've ever had to burn a bridge to stop yourself from crossing back over it, hit that like button. Share this with the responsible one in your life who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories about finding your freedom. Thanks for listening.